Hello, everyone. My name is Alicia Johnson, and here we are with another round of Shelf Care with Alicia, where I, a licensed therapist who loves to read, gets to read all the fun self-help books, and then I go over what I liked, any criticisms that I have of it, and then you get to decide based on that information if it's worth it for you or not to go buy and read. Because there's so many books out there. We've only got so little time. I want you to find the good books. So this month we read the Come As You Are Workbook by Emily Nagoski, PhD. It's a practical guide to the science of sex. I'm going to be careful with some of the words that I use because I don't actually know what all I can talk about without these things getting shut down or flagged for inappropriate things. So we're going to get creative here. This is a companion workbook to the book Come As You Are, which I already did a review about. It's probably one of my favorite books. I recommend it to everyone. I think my only note on that was like, I want more. I want more book, and she gave it to us. So overall, this workbook is about providing practical and evidence-based tools, really focusing on like the individual personal sensual experience. So it's very much about self-reflection, self-exploration, being curious, reducing shame, a lot of questions, exercises, questionnaires, all that jazz, so that people can better understand themselves. And it's less about like relationship stuff. So I'm going to kind of get into that. I'm getting ahead of myself. This works really well as a companion. So if you want kind of getting them together, these exercises go a little bit more in depth, but like if you want more of the information and the science and just like understanding things a little bit more, I would really recommend reading this first. But if you either already have kind of a decent foundation and want more self-exploration, or really just because you want to, you can always start here and then you can always work backwards if you would like. So, lastly, I think we'll just kind of like giving the overview. This workbook really acknowledges what it is and what it isn't. So it acknowledges that it is not a relationship book, which is interesting, right? Because you think about the topic, and that's a very relational thing that a lot of people do. Um, and it does. Like, obviously, it's going to impact that if you're in a relationship and you are doing those types of things. Um, but it's not necessarily about like if that is one of your main issues in your relationship, or there's deeper relationship things around trust or resentment or communication or other things like that. Those aren't necessarily going to get changed by these things in this book. So I like that it kind of like calls that out where you might want to read these other books that are maybe more relationship focused or do some relationship work in addition to, because I really like anyone who kind of is honest about their stuff of what they can and can't do. So this book's not trying to like promise everything. It's really just saying like your own relationship with stuff, which makes sense when we think about a lot of the exercises are about self-exploration, where are we getting messages from? It's really just about like your own stuff. So, of course, we know as humans, like our stuff's going to impact our partner stuff if we're in a relationship, but that's not the main goal. So, take that with whatever you need. I'm going to start with what I liked about this one because very similar to the book Come As You Are, I liked so many things and my criticisms are minimal. So overall, I love how it talks about shame and where we get the early messaging from around intimacy. Because, I mean, if you think about it, well, first of all, early on, it's like explores like different exercises that help us figure out what messages do we get. But it really normalizes things and gives some good examples of, I can think of so many times I've seen this play out where like parents of clients would be like, oh, like my kid was, exploring their body. And I was like, oh my gosh, no, don't do that. Or, oh, that's private. We don't do that. And the response, even though like as an adult, you might know the nuance of, hey, this is private or mature or whatever makes sense for your language. If you immediately respond with like, "Oh my gosh, this is bad. Please don't do that." Like, "Oh my gosh, no, we're never going to talk about this." Subconsciously and unintentionally, that kind of shapes it into something that you should be ashamed of. And even though as a kid you might be saying like, "Okay, well like a kid doesn't need to do this." Well, if you're not necessarily talking about that and really exploring that, suddenly they're going to become an adult who is also uncomfortable with those things. And they're gonna like their body's gonna remember that immediate response of like, oh my gosh, no, like this is really bad. It also does a good job of exploring like cultural messages that is specifically women. This book is mainly targeted for women. Um, but like if you think about like purity culture, even, right? How so much of women in certain purity cultures are taught you need to be pure, you can't do anything, you have to look and act and all these things a certain way. And then simultaneously, though, once you're married or, you're this object of this other person, now you're also supposed to be like really comfortable and pleasure your partner in this way. Like it doesn't make sense, right? So I like that it kind of calls out that paradox and helps explore more about that personal relationship that we have with our bodies, with intimacy, and kind of deconstructing some of those outside messages of us being viewed as objects or only being, desirable if certain things are met, or just like any of these messages around intimacy. Um, yeah, I think that's all I have to say on that one. I also really like, similar to the shame and like some of exploring some of those messages, anything that involves compassion, your girl is in it. So early on, I loved when there's some hands-on, pun intended, hands-on exercises. It's very gentle, very mindful, curious. The goal is to be non-judgmental and really just, you guessed it, I'm gonna sound like a broken record this hour. Explore, be curious. So they do a really good job of doing that and calling it out in a way where it's like, hey, this might be new for you. This might be a little weird for you. That's okay. Play around with it. Notice your thoughts, notice your reactions. You don't have to immediately label yourself as broken or wrong or bad. So it's like sneaky self-compassion work, which I appreciate because as much as I love like an in-your-face self-compassion exercise, sneaky self-compassion exercises are also chef's kiss. So we've got shame, we've got compassion, we've got empowerment. These self-exploration exercises were so well thought out, I think. There's a lot of just like general questions, but then there's kind of journal prompts there. And I think those were some of the strongest parts because, and I think really that's a point of the book, right? Is like she kind of explores some of these themes. She gives a few examples, but then the bulk of the work is like how are you making sense of it? What's standing out from you? What have you learned? Kind of just like giving names to different experiences. And so, again, it's that theme of being curious versus like this needs to be like a right or wrong. So, it's just a lot of exploration that I think was really empowering for people and really validating of the variety of experiences because she does do a good job of like sharing a little bit. And I think people can really feel like seen and understood in this book. I also like that there's, some parts where she does encourage a lot of exploration. When we think about this topic, there's a lot to explore. And even though it's about exploration and curiosity, it's not about pressuring you to doing something that you don't want to do or you don't like. So it does that with like it might say, hey, like here's one thing that you can do. So keyword can, it's not forcing you to do anything. But there's like this area about going to like a toy shop. And it's like, hey, just because there's these toys there doesn't mean you have to try all these things. It doesn't, again, it's not saying that you are bad or wrong or anything. You're not a label if you don't want to try some of these things. While simultaneously, we're also not yucking on the people who do want to explore those things or who really like those things. So it's very much empowering of like, there's all these different things out there. If you want to try some things or you really enjoy some things, love that. If you don't want to try some things because you don't want to, not because someone else is telling you what you should or shouldn't do, that's okay too. Your boundaries matter. So it's not shaming in any way where if you like something or don't like something, it's not pressuring you. So I really liked that balance that they did of like they wanted to encourage some exploration and playing around with some stuff, but also like just very trauma informed. Like this is consensual. If this is your body, if you don't want to do something, don't do something. I really just love, I'm a language person. If you watched any of these my videos, I think I say this in pretty much probably all of my videos, of how much language is important. Language is so powerful. If we can have the accurate words to describe our experiences, one, it can be super freeing. Like, we can see ourselves in this book, especially around a super sensitive topic like this. It can be like, oh my gosh, I never had words for this before. And it can be really, really normalizing. I also really like the language because so much of this stuff, one, some schools won't even talk about sex ed anymore. So we're really getting our messages from like our friends, maybe our parents, maybe a book, maybe a video, maybe online, maybe on the bus, who knows, right? So she explains these really important concepts that I think are, if you take anything away from the book, and you're going to get that in both of these books. So that's one of the things where even though it's repetitive, it's important. She talks about desire, pleasure, and arousal. Those are three distinct things. And so oftentimes when we think about this topic, we kind of just assume it's like one thing going on, but really it's multiple things going on. And so we also think of like desire as the main thing of like, well, if I'm not having a ton of this in my relationship, it must be a desire thing. Well, it's actually a little bit more nuanced than that. And so you have the actual words and descriptions of like what's going on. And then, of course, doing a really good job of exploring like the myths around, well, some people have this like spontaneous desire and sometimes people don't. And like there isn't like this right or wrong. So it just normalizes like the different experiences. There's something called like responsive and spontaneous desire. I guess I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. And so again, just like having a word for that instead of before just desire. And then you think, well, in these movies and in the shows and in this book that I'm reading, like it always just like happens out of nowhere, like I'm just doing the dishes and my partner walks in and they're just ready to go, but like you might not be that way. And of course, our brains immediately blame us, right? Oh, there must be something wrong with me. I must be bad. I must be broken. Let me fix all this stuff. And so we could having that language of, oh, I might be more of a responsive desire, and that might mean these other things have to kind of happen for that to get activated. So I really love that language. Um, Also, when talking about spontaneous desire, again, we're not yucking people's yum. If you have a body that has that spontaneous desire, they do not shame that. They're like, love that for you. However, if you are a person who maybe needs to even like schedule something or start a little slow and build up a little bit, like that's also very normal. So she, again, just like a good job of like, there's not this one right way of feeling these things. It's very much a variety of things. And so if you have a high passion relationship, that's amazing. If you don't, that's also okay and normal. So again, we're just like kind of teasing apart these different terms, and there is no like general consensus of this is how this should be. She even does one of my favorite lines as a therapist I'll tell people is like, don't shit on yourselves. And she quoted that in this book. It's a common one. Like I did not come up with that phrase. And I shared that on my Instagram because I was like, amazing. Okay, so along the lines with important language, we talked about desire, arousal, and pleasure, kind of like the different types of desire, even. There's also something really good about what's called accelerators and brakes when it comes to arousal. This book goes super in depth in it. So if you think that's a term or some terms that like you really want to explore more about, this book, the original book, would be what I would recommend starting with. If you just need like a little refresher, you just want to start somewhere, this book does a great, like easy, accessible summary of it and how different things like different contexts or stress or our mood, things like that can impact those things. But this one's going to go a lot in depth. So depending on what you need, that's where this is more of a companion. But great terms. Again, having that language and that framework can help you like just understand the nuance of what's really going on in your body and realizing that 99.9% of it is probably normal. I say that because there's some things where it's like, okay, that might, you are going to be the expert of your body. There's going to be some things that might be a sign of, hey, I need to go to the doctor. But other than that, most things that are going on in that system are probably normal. Again, if you've watched my videos, you know I'm what's called a systems thinker, which means I like when we kind of explore multiple areas and just like I don't know, maybe one of these days I need to just like really give an explanation and then like copy and paste that. But anyway, this book is hecka systemic. It talks about the messages we get from like, if we think about us in the center, it talks about like our family and our friends and the media and our culture. So just like all these different systems, things there. And like beliefs about our bodies and how that impacts sexuality. So it's very systemic, very reflective. And I think the journal prompts and some of those like assessment and questions kind of blend all that together for that self-awareness and exploration. I have a con, but I think I'm going to dive into that a little bit later. But overall, I'm going to give this a 9.5 out of 10 for being systemic. It's super great. One of my favorite parts of the book, again, it kind of blends into one of my cons, so I'm trying to think of how I want to phrase it, um, is towards the end, it talks a lot about pleasure. And I'm just going to dive into it. I do wish that this part of the book was earlier because I think it actually would change a lot of. Anyway, I don't have to dive into that quite yet. But towards the end, it really shifts us from thinking about like having an end goal. Like this only counts if there's an orgasm, or it's only, has to be a certain amount of time, or just like these really rigid expectations that it has. So instead of like the performance and these end goals, the last few chapters are really all about pleasure, exploration, curiosity. And I really enjoyed that like different way of thinking. It also like kind of gently calls us out of like if you're really focused on that end goal, right? Of like it has to end a very specific way or it has to respond in this very specific way. Shocker, that can actually like activate our brakes, right? And like create more anxiety and create more pressure and guess what? Not feeling very enjoyable in that moment. And so it like actually helps you get to where you want to go by like taking the pressure off of going there. So it's, but also like if you're, anyway, yeah, she does a great job. Read her words, not my words on it. I don't want this video to get taken off. At the end of each little section, there's also little Q&As, which I think are really great because it shows like this stuff is not common sense. Like, I think a lot of us feel like, oh my gosh, I should know this, I'm 40 years old, or I've done this all of this time. Like, how do I not know this stuff? Or we get embarrassed to ask these questions. And so she puts it in a book and it's like, oh, yeah, There's no such thing as stupid questions here. So very practical, very relatable. Love it. I really loved the resources as well that she recommends throughout the book. So, like I said in the beginning, she kind of says, it's not a relationship book. If you want these relationship books, here are some recommendations. There's also this area when we're talking about I think like some of the pleasure and self-exploration stuff. She's like, hey, if you've never done any of these things, here's a spreadsheet that you can go to. And I'm like a nerdy girl like myself loves a spreadsheet. So if we're talking about like intimacy in a spreadsheet, ugh, amazing. But then one of my favorite parts was she recommended a toy shop in Minnesota called Smitten Kitten. I hope I can say that here. I'm obsessed with Minnesota, if you couldn't tell. And this shop is an incredible shop. Like, yes, it's great for the things that they have, but also it's just like an incredible group of people run it. They do some amazing work for the community. And so being able to like see them in this book, just made my heart so happy. And so it's okay if you need to go to a shop or look at some of these online resources to kind of explore around a little bit. And yeah, I love a nerdy spreadsheet. So speaking my language. All right, so that's basically the main things that I loved about the book. A few things that I had some thoughts. I don't know if I think I like disliked anything, but I had some thoughts. I have some criticisms. So take this with whatever you will. This is a potential con just because I get why she had to do it, but there is a lot of overlap with the original book. So you kind of have to, right, though, because they are technically independent from each other. So you could read this book as a standalone. So she does need to repeat some of the important information from this book if you aren't going to read. I mean, this one's a little bit, it's a recommended read, but it's definitely a lot thicker, right? Um, so you have to repeat some of the things like around those big language definitions, the different types of desire, things like that. So it does feel a little redundant and repetitive. So if you have read this before, I think it's okay just like go into it. Still, you're still going to get a lot out of this, but just recognize you might have to skim over some of those things. But it had to be included because if you haven't read that, those are some like key foundational things that are important to know. I would say I think this book does a better job of building awareness than maybe going into like deeper, tangible solutions. And that's again probably just the scope of the book. Like I guess I just say practical. So when I hear practical, I kind of think of solutions. But in her explanation of the goal of the book, it's very much about curiosity, self-exploration. So that I think achieves the goal 10 out of 10. However, there's some areas where it's like, how had you identify your barriers and kind of things that can turn on your brakes, like slow down desire. And like she tries to offer some things to help, like with, lowering our anxiety, calming our nervous system, stuff like that. But it's hard to do, like, if you have a ton of anxiety, it's hard to, like, this book, there's entire workbooks on anxiety, right? So it's like you have to address it, but also if you know you're a person who maybe that's like a really big barrier, you might want to use this in addition to therapy or additional like anxiety tools. Or if you like recognize what these barriers are, you might need a supplemental resource to really overcome that. So like this doesn't guarantee like it's gonna fix everything, but it does build some really good awareness, some self-reflection, and if you notice there's some like stuck points, um, just maybe like needing additional resources with that. I think my biggest con with the book, and I mean, she prepped you going into it that it's not a relationship book, so I get it. I do. Don't come at me. Um, But there's parts that then encourage you to share what you discover about yourself with a partner. And in an ideal world, I love that. I love if there's a healthy communication and trust in the relationship where you can talk about these things openly and honestly. And I Love nothing more than that if they are emotionally safe and supportive. However, realistically, I know not everyone has amazing, safe, supportive partners. So if you notice, like, trust your gut. If there's these areas where you're like, "Ooh, I really like it's encouraging me to talk to my partner about this or to, do this with my partner," and you notice like some like hesitancy and resistance, that could be a sign that maybe there's some deeper foundational work in your relationship that could be explored before those conversations take place. So again, she already like acknowledges it in the beginning, but just to reiterate, like even though it says like, hey, talk about what, initiation styles you like. In an ideal world, would love that. But if it isn't safe to do that, there might be some things underlying that could be explored as well. Okay, so I think I mentioned this earlier. And I was kind of like trying to figure out like what I liked about the end, but then like the where it was anyway. Anyway, probably my other critique is how it's set up. It starts with some exploration-y stuff, messages, love that. And then the kind of like the middle part is about creating change. And there's like change plan and very tangible things that you can do and you can track and all this stuff. And it fell, and then at the end, it talks about pleasure and exploration and all that stuff. So if I were an editor, I would have actually swapped the pleasure and exploration stuff to the middle and then had the change be at the end because how the change plan came off, pun intended, um, is it almost felt like the goal was about increasing frequency of something, which is the antithesis of what the entire end of the book was about, which was let's take away the goals, let's take away this pressure, let's take away these expectations, let's focus on pleasure, exploration, curiosity. And I think those are so much more in line with the messages of the book that the change plan just seemed very much like a to-do list and more of like, yep, we just need it's just focused on the outcome. Like, yep, we're just going to increase frequency. We're going to increase frequency. We're going to ignore all the context and relationship stuff. And I could totally see like as weird as this sounds, like I always envision like different clients because I use my books with my clients. And so I'm like thinking of conversations I've had with people and I can just see folks reading that change area and then self-blaming and feeling this pressure that like there's something wrong with them. They need to fix themselves for their partner to please them. They're the problem of why they aren't, having this frequency of intimacy. And that's so not the point that the author is trying to make. And so I think if the, the middle and the end were swapped, I think the change could be more focused on the pleasure. Um, and yeah, so I guess that's all I need to say with that. I guess I'm trying to think. Well, the other thing I wanted to say with that, it kind of relates to the other point too, is in the change plan, it's very much individual focused, which again is the point of the book. I get it, but it's hard to like, we're kind of like blaming the individual for some of these things when sometimes it's the partners that are contributing to the brakes being put on or not pulling their weight around things or bringing up insecurities. And so, again, I think that's not the point of the book is to address those things. But if you're noticing some of those thoughts coming up of like, well, I don't want to maybe do some of these change things because I don't feel safe or because my partner has done some of these things. That could be a sign that some couples work or some of those couples resources might be a really good starting spot as well. Okay, I think that's all the tangents I have on that one. Again, I understand why they did it, but then like the practicality and the application of it, there's a little bit of a gap there. So The other thing that I would take note of, if you haven't read it yet, is that trauma is only briefly addressed. And weirdly, it's like in the middle of the book. Like, let me tell you, some of the first exercises, you are getting very up in your business with yourself. And so if you have sexual trauma history, those things could be very triggering. And I know this author's work, they are super trauma informed. And so I'm surprised that it wasn't introduced earlier and kind of just like explored a little bit of like, hey, how vulnerable and personal some of these exercises are. If this is something that you have experience with, like it's okay to notice these reactions, take your time, all that jazz. Um, but yeah, like this book obviously isn't how to overcome trauma. So if you have some trauma there that is impacting your body in those ways, it does a beautiful job of normalizing that, explaining that, what can happen in the body during those things. That could be worth exploring with a therapist or other resources as well, though, just because our body, like, I want you to feel safe in your body for these things. And the goal of this is to increase your pleasure and curiosity. And so your body needs to feel safe within itself, not just in these relational contexts as well. So, okay, that's pretty much it. I really enjoyed this book. I mean, I have a lot of different notes on it. I love this author. I love the work that they do. So overall, I would give it a 4.5. Yeah, that seems fair. Out of 5 stars. Some of the reflection stuff at the end became a little like redundant. I really liked the beginning of the book's reflection stuff, and then I really liked the exercises at the end of the book. So just a few of the critical things there. But other than that, I mean, it's a beautiful, compassionate, validating, empowering, normalize, like all these things that I love to do and with my clients. It's just tackled the subject in such a great way. I think it really helps people take a potentially like shameful or taboo topic and really like helps people be curious and um just like really like self-understanding. So I'm probably have said those words 1,000 times, but that's truly the point of the book, and it really resonated with that. So overall, I would recommend this to all women, but really, most women who are curious about some self-exploration around intimacy, desire, pleasure, things like that. If you are ready to really like dive into those things, I mean, these books, this book, those journal prompts are super powerful and in depth. So if you're like ready to kind of unbox some of those things and go there, you're going to get a lot out of this book. If you have some of, like most women in our society, if you have some shame around your body or sexuality, this book does a great job tackling that, kind of helping us rethink and kind of like own what's ours and then be like, I don't really need these other messages. So if you have read Come As You Are, I would still recommend this. I would honestly, if you loved this book, then immediately do this one just because it helps you dive a little bit deeper, more inward for yourself. If you enjoy journaling and self-exploration, this is going to be a book for you. So here for it. If you are looking to like deeply process your trauma work with this, I would be cautious. I mean, cautious isn't the right word, but I don't know if you're gonna get as much out of it. You're gonna be the expert in you. I mean, everyone's trauma journeys are so different, so only you're gonna be able to know where you are, what you can handle, what you're needing. And so this, I just wouldn't have as much of like a blanket recommendation for that. Could be really helpful for some folks, could be not helpful. If you are wanting some really deep relationship work, or if your relationship has some big stuck points or needs some repair over some things, then this book, it can be a good companion. Because again, you're going to be doing a lot of work on yourself. You're going to be figuring out a lot of stuff, but you're one piece of the puzzle. And so if it's not safe, if there's deeper things going on, this book is not that resource, but it can be used in addition to those things. Um, but yeah, I mean, those are pretty much my only two major critiques. So overall, I loved it. It's a great book. I would read anything that she writes. I would read a phone book. Just incredible work. So if you have other book recommendations for me, let me know. I am always adding to my read list. And if you've heard of a book and you want to know if it's worth the hype, let me know. And until then, happy reading.